Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we want to do a little bit of a challenge. I've been searching the Instawebs and I saw this beautiful bustier that's so exciting and flirty and fun, and it's been trending all over Pinterest. So I thought, you know what, let's do a challenge. Let's look at a picture and let's create a pattern and design just by looking at the picture alone. Okay, so let's get started. So I first got some muslin fabric. I cut a piece that would fit the size of the top part of a bustier, and then I started blocking. Now blocking is when we start messing around with the wefts of the fabric, but first you need to cut the selvage end in order for it to be accurate. Okay, so that's me tearing off the selvage end, and then I start blocking the fabric, and then afterwards I pressed it. So the first thing I did was to line my ruler close to the torn selvage end, and then I made a straight line, and on that straight line I labeled it CF to indicate the center front. Then on my trusty portable mannequin, I then lined the center front, then pinned it to the mannequin. I also tightened across the bust and pinned it to the side in order for it to get a contour feel, and then also left the leave out to be a little loose, and then contoured the bust by creating dots on top and on the bottom. That will be the direction of the princess lines on the bustier. So with the gentle pinch, I used some pins to contour the bust. I'll be putting a list of instruments and tools that I've been using throughout the video in the description box below, okay? So when pinning the bottom portion, I just make sure that the curve of the princess line is pretty accurate and aesthetically pleasing. Then afterwards, I used a pencil to line and mark all the dotted legs of the darts on both sides. While marking, remember to mark the apex, which are the nipple points. Okay, so guys, I'm trying something new. I'm trying some ASMR, where you'll be hearing the sounds of my instruments and tools and my environment. So let me know if you guys like the sounds. Okay, so what we're going to do is get the bust measurement, and we're going to divide that. So my bust is around 29 to 30, and you divide that, and then you divide it again, and that will be a quarter of your bust measurement. So my quarter of a bust measurement is 7.5, I believe, and we'll measure it across the bust and mark it with a pencil. After marking with a pencil, extend the lines upwards and downwards, and then you do the same thing with the waist or under the bust. My under the bust is 26, and then I half it, and then I'll half it again. And that would be a quarter of my under bust measurement. Mine is 6 3/4. Okay, so you do that throughout the whole bust area, even on the above the bust, across the bust, and under the bust. And then you just make sure that the lines on the side are accurate with the size of your bust. Pin the extra fabric back. Then you take your ruler and draw the final line. So before drawing out the design, I decided to look at the details of the design, like the shape of the bust line and the shape of the cup where the center front is centered. So I measured down from the neckline 5 3/4 and marked. Then placed an A on the apex area. Then measured 3 inches up from the apex for an A cup bust size. Then mark the point on both dart legs. Over here I'm just checking that both sides are 3 inches high from the apex.
That's 3. It's like, what are we following?
So I took a look at the image again just to see the width of the middle bust area. I marked 3/4 of an inch towards the bust. Then 3 inches downwards for the underbust.
All around.
Then connect the marks to shape up the cup. So I took a look at the shape of the cup and decided to create a heart shape kind of neckline. So on the image, I realized that there was no specific bodice foundation for the cup. So that's when I decided to add at least an inch to 3/4 of an inch under the cup as a bodice. I then made a few marks to match the cup to the bodice. So after unpinning the drape from the bodice, I then removed the needles to get a better look at the pattern that was created. By using my ruler, I then straightened the lines and finalized a few shapes of each piece. While straightening the lines, I make sure that each side does make sense and match. I then continued to define the lines by using my curved shape ruler. Remember to mark the apex point and use a measuring tape to measure each side so that each side may match. I then continue to use my curve shape ruler to finish creating the curved lines. So now we're going to cut out the pattern with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then we're going to pin it back onto the form. And then hand stitch onto the rectified lines along the princess seam. So the cup felt a little loose, so I just did a little pinch onto the gaping area, then pinned it close to the bodice, and felt my way down the princess line to make sure the whole curve was fitted onto the bust. When satisfied, I went back with a pencil to draft the new lines. And then started draping the back bodice in respect to the front bodice. So we repeat what we've done with the front bodice and lined up the center back line to the back seam of the mannequin. Then cut off the excess fabric and then pinned it close to the bodice. So when we take a look at the back, it's pretty basic and straight to the point. We see how the ruffle is attached to the back bodice. So that's what we're going to try and create here. So by using the measuring tape to line up the top edge of the back across from the front to the back, and you do that both for the top and for the bottom. So now we repeat what we've done on the front bodice, where we halfen the circumference of our bust, the top, the middle, the bottom of our bust once, and then again to get the quarter of the measurement of the back bodice. I then unpinned the drape and squared the points to the side seam. Cut 1/2 inch from the seam line. Then 1 inch at the center back seam. Now that we have finished drafting our different pieces, it's time to puzzle them together by making sure that the lines match from the front bodice to the back bodice. Once you've matched the lines accordingly, take your curved ruler and curve out the lines so that they can blend properly together. So just to avoid any confusion, I took a marker and just lined up the new curved lines. So this is where I had to be a little bit more innovative of how I'm going to connect the bodices and how am I going to connect the front to the back and how I'm going to put the ruffles in place. So here's how I did it. So what I first did was hand stitch the side seams together because I wanted to first test out the design on myself so that I can see the fit and the silhouette. So I lined up half of the pattern onto myself and pinned it with a pin onto my sports bra. And also pinned the back. So I found a lot of changes that needed to be done when I pinned it on myself. So if you're doing this for someone else, I advise that you first drape it on them so that you get the exact measurements that is aesthetically pleasing to their body type. So the main changes I made was to lower the center front neckline and then blend it through up to the cup. I also shortened the cup because I think 3 inches is a little too high, so I took down 3/4, it looks like. And I also pinched it just a little bit more so that it has a much snug fit. I also made minor adjustments on the cup and made it a slight shorter and closer to the bust. I also took the liberty to measure the strap that will be connected from the front bodice to the back bodice. The strap will be connected next to the cup going back, and it's around 15.5 inches. Okay, so I went back and remarked the different changes. After rectifying my lines, I then took a scissor and cut off each piece exactly on each line. Remember to label each piece while cutting. Next, I've decided to take the side bodice panel to create the shoulder strap that will be connected to the back bodice. After pinning the pattern piece onto the pattern paper, we're going to draft the strap, which is 15.5 inches high, from the top edge of the bodice panel. Using the width of the side bodice panel, we're going to use the edges of the panel to create the width of the strap. Double check the length and then add your 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I was figuring out ways on how to not make too many pattern pieces, so I decided to combine the front bodice panel with the side front bodice panel to make one pattern piece. After adding some allowance throughout the whole pattern, I put a little notch to indicate the combined point. I then placed the back bodice panel and marked the notch where the front and back may meet. Make sure the notch where the two panels combine is marked, because that's where also the princess lines of the cup will meet. So when satisfied, you may cut out the pattern piece. Remove the muslin pattern and label the pattern piece. Then transfer the rest of the pattern pieces onto the pattern paper and add 1/2 inch seam allowance, label and mark the different notches. We now have to determine how long is the ruffle. That will go along the edge of the front panel, going up the strap to the back bodice and down to the edge of the back bodice. I then took my measuring tape and measured along the edges which gave me a total of 38 inches.
The back is gathered and then the front is pleated. There's 2 pleats in the front. So I said 38. We can divide it by, right? Let's say 45, right? Let's say 45 divided by 3 circles, 6 circles. Yeah, we say 45 divided by 6 circles. Let's see, 45 divided by 6 circles, so it's 7.5 per circle. So the circle, the radius of the circle, or the circle radius, whatever, circumference, whatever, needs to be 7.5 inches.
So basically what that calculation was is that the middle part of the circle will be 7.5 inches. And the width or the height of the ruffle will be 7.5 all around.
Put that in somewhere.
So I'm obviously doing it in a very a long way, and I could have just folded the pattern paper 4 times and then did 1/4 of the radius of the middle circle and then extended the 7 inches all around that little part, cut it out, and then it would be a circle. But I guess I was going with my mind, at the time thinking on the spot. So you're welcome to use the easier method if you're drafting your own pattern. I then went over the lines, the drafted lines, with a marker. Then cut out the pattern piece. To cut out the middle of the circle, you then cut a straight line through the pattern piece and then cut out the small circle from the center. When you're done, you'll see that it will create the ruffle effect that we're trying to achieve. When labeling the ruffle, it's important to note to cut 6 because you'll be making a whole row full of ruffles combined together. Then lastly, when patterning out the back panel, do the same as what you've done. Add the 1/2 inch seam allowance throughout, but at the center back, add 1 inch of a seam allowance. So in total, you'll have the ruffle piece, the back panel piece, the front bodice piece, and the 2 cup panels. Okay guys, so that's what you get for part 1. We draped and made some patterns, and now for part 2, the next video, we'll be cutting and sewing the garments together in part 2. Make sure to subscribe and click the bell so that you can be notified for the next video.